Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we have a very distinguished guest. And I mean distinguished. When you get an author in here who was featured not in the New York Times Book Review, although he was also featured there, but in the New York Times Magazine, you got yourself something. Even though he's an author who's never, quote, graduated, unquote, from the short story. His name is George Saunders. He's written some stories. They're collected in a book called 10th of December, which is published by Random House, and we're happier than hell that you're here.
Me too.
Good to see you. You know, going back to that, you haven't written a novel yet. I think I read that you have written a children's book.
A very short one, yeah.
Of course.
Everything, I've written novels, but they shrink. So I've written a novel, but it's only 13 pages. Is that a problem?
Oh, so the name of the children's book?
It's called The Very Persistent Gappers of Fripp. So the title is long.
The Very Persistent
Gappers of Fripp, and it was illustrated by Lane Smith, who's a legendary kids book author. Yeah.
Okay. Now, a very distinguished author. We're all full of distinction today. Distinguished stuff. By the name of Egan, said of 10th of December that it shows George Saunders at his most, and this is a group of words, subversive, hilarious, and emotionally piercing. Few writers can encompass that range of adjectives, but Saunders is a true original, restlessly inventive, yet deeply humane. Now, Jennifer Egan, I found a difficult author to read, but I understand what she's saying here. You are all those things, and I find it quite remarkable. Thanks. And a lot of the stories in here stay with me. And even the beginning story. Sometimes the beginning stories in collections don't stay with you. Mm-hmm. They're there to get you in.
Right.
But this first story, called Victory Lap, brings up some issues that are important and fundamental, beginning with how parenting can be done and how wrong-headed it can be. Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
Yeah.
These parents are nuts.
Yeah, they're a little nutty.
Tell us about them.
Well, most of my stories, I don't start off with any kind of ideas like that. I'm just trying to get a little bit of zap going, a little bit of fun.
And that is your genius, and it's hard to talk about them because the natural way is, well, here's this idea that I found in the story, but you just go wham.
Yeah, I was raised in Chicago, and one of the things I finally realized kind of late in my life was that the kind of entertaining stuff that we do in conversation there or in school that actually can be literary. So for me, the doorway is always kind of get some language going that's funny, that draws the reader in. And then the magical thing is if you can do that, the other stuff shows up, the theme and the character. And this issue you're talking about with parenting, it showed up very naturally one day. And I thought, oh, wow, I didn't know the story was about that. But at the time, it was funny because we have two daughters. And our daughter had gone to a bagel shop near our house, and weirdly, these 5 guys, as she came out to the car, surrounded the car. And the one guy said something you never want to hear, which is, "Don't worry, we're not going to hurt you." Oh. And she was in the car by this time, and he said, roll the window down. And my daughter is a real sweetheart, and she just come home from a trip to Peru, and she came home saying, Dad, what I learned on this trip was if you just trust people, think the best of them, they'll rise to the occasion. Mm-hmm. Which as a parent, you're kind of like, yeah,
but honey,
yes
now,
and no.
But
yes.
Now you're in Chicago.
Yeah. So she in that moment of crisis, she did not roll the window down, and she hit the gas and almost backed over one of the guys. So it was interesting to me that all the training we'd given her, all the training she'd given herself, in that moment of crisis, she was on her own, and she made the right decision. So that idea definitely leads into that story, that we do our best to raise our kids intelligently, but in the moment of truth, they're the only ones who can make the decision on the spot.
In the story, the parents try to imprison a young boy in their directives.
Right.
I mean, they're crazy.
The ultimate helicopter parents. Yeah. But I kind of, I ended up sort of liking them because at one point the father says, I know we strike you as strict, but you are literally all we have, So
yes.
I could kind of understand it. But his crisis is, can he, in a moment of crisis, shuck off all of that habituation and sort of find the right thing to do.
And even, God forbid, use a geo to hit somebody over the head. Whoa.
It's an untraditional weapon, but... Yeah.
In fact, the parents have a nickname for him. Actually, they have two.
They have two. The mother calls him Beloved Only, and the father calls him a Scout.
Yeah.
I don't know I have no idea where that came from, because my parents were quite, great. They were kind of loose with us and whatever we wanted to do. But there were some kids that lived near us in Chicago, and they had this thing. There were 6 boys, and they were very good kids, and they had a system of treats. So Wednesday, for example, was a major treat day. And so we used to mock these kids out, but I think they ended up being Olympic athletes, all of them. So there was some wisdom in that parents' method.
But these parents, their parenting approach, it seems to me, is all captured by the other name, Beloved Only.
Yeah, he is beloved, and he's the only one. So he gets all their attention.
And we're going to kill for that if we have to. I mean, that's the implication.
Yeah. Well, I love in that story, one of the again, sort of happy side effects I didn't anticipate was to think about what their lives would have been like if he didn't do the thing he did. So stories have all kind of strange repercussions that you don't anticipate.
Oh well. Though I don't want anybody to forget that 10th of December had a story excerpted in the New Yorker before publication, of course. And we're going to talk about that when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
George Saunders. He is our guest today, and he comes to us from the cover of the New York Times Magazine and as the author of a collection of short stories called 10th of December. And we are indeed honored. Thank you again for coming by. A fellow who has a bit of a local reputation by the name of Dave Eggers said some wonderful things about your book. I've urged George Saunders on to everyone and everyone. You want funny? Saunders is your man. You want emotional heft? Saunders again. You want stories that are actually about something? Stories that again and again get to the meat of matters of life and death and justice and country? Saunders. There is no one better, no one more essential to our national sense of self and sanity. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is he a brother?
No, he's you can feel his generosity there. He is a brother.
Yeah, he is a brother in writing, isn't he?
He sure is.
He certainly is, yeah.
Great person.
One of the other things that happened is this with most of the stories in here is that they got published first in the New Yorker, which ain't bad. It's New York Times, New Yorker. What the hey? And
been overlooked by the Vatican, however.
I'm sorry. The one that the story that was one of the stories that was in the New Yorker is the one with the most fascinating title, "The Spreaker Girl Diaries." Explain. No, we don't want to do that.
Well,
I mean, it's a very, very long story, and could be a short novel.
I tried. Believe me, I tried. I started that one in '98 actually, and it was up to 200 pages several times, and it kept always shrinking down. But I actually had a dream one night where I was got up out of bed, went to this window, and looked out in the yard, and there was the thing that's described in the story. This kind of spooky, horrible thing was in my yard. And instead of thinking, oh, my God, call the police, in the dream, I thought, oh, we're so lucky we finally arrived and we're able to get this thing. These Spreaker girls.
Oh, okay.
And I woke up with that phrase in my head, the Spreaker girls. And so then kind of just, wrote it down the next day. And then for the next 12 years was trying to make sense of it.
there is a something going on here. Not everybody has these girls,
right? And our narrator doesn't have them at the beginning.
Yeah, there is a father who has a plea, a prayer. Lord, he plays, give us more, give us enough. Help us not fall behind our peers. Help us not, that is, fall further behind our peers for the kids' sake. Do not want them scared by how far behind we are. That is like every parent's plea, it seems to me.
I think so.
In these days.
It was sure ours when our kids were little.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, we had it pretty good, but we were working hard. And so a lot of the things, what we did was we sort of decided to err on the side of filling up the credit cards if we needed to. So that produces some interesting pressures. Yeah. I don't recommend it as a general approach.
Now, the Semplica girls are, I assume, young girls from places like Laos, Moldova, Kuwait, etc., who are brought into the United States by rich people and are used, it seems, I wrote, because I'm not sure, as a kind of garden ornament.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what I saw in the dream was these 4, maybe 20-something women. And the other nifty detail is that they're hung on a wire. There's a line that goes through their heads, and they just hang there like that. So in the dream, they were in these beautiful white smocks, long hair, and they were perfectly happy. They weren't in any pain. And as I looked at them, I just thought, oh, I'm so lucky to be able to provide this for my family. So troubling dream. And then, but boy, really interesting to try to, Faulkner used to have this thing where if he'd see an image that was interesting to him, he'd just say that's the basis of the novel and start trying to figure out how did they get in that position? Yeah, how did those people? So for me, that was a great little seed crystal of what the heck does that mean? Why is he happy about this? What are the physical mechanics of these women arriving? And in the process of working that out, this larger story got told. But strange to wake up with that and think, oh yeah, that could actually be pretty productive.
The your family puts up with you, and you have these.
Well, I pretty much keep it to myself. Just go write it down, and then go to work.
Now the Semplica girls then come to dominate in a way the life of this couple that gets one marvelous break,
right? And
they win a lottery.
They win the lottery, and instead of using it to pay down their credit cards or college fund, they decide to keep up with the Joneses and acquire these lawn ornaments. And
it sounds like me.
Yeah, it sounds like me. But I heard a very wise man one time said, if you buy a goat, you get one goat's worth of problems. And I thought that was kind of in this story. They acquire this thing, they don't do much moral investigation, and they've got $10,000 worth of problems in their yard.
Now, they are almost called back down to earth by by one of their daughters, Eva,
right?
Who's one of the younger
I think she's
ones,
the
or the
youngest.
Yeah. Who
she has kind of the authentic the reaction that you or I would have to these things. I don't like this. We don't want to have it. And one of the fun parts of the story was that she looks like a nut. She, in this culture, these things are totally accepted, and she's the one voice of what we would call sanity, but no one's really listening to her.
That's the other thing. Everybody's doing it.
Yeah,
Everybody's having these Semplica girls,
right.
and if you don't have it, you're out.
Kind of a loser. Yeah. There's a wonderful book called I Will Bear Witness by Victor Klemperer. It's a series of 2 Holocaust-era diaries by a Dresden Jew named Victor Klemperer, and it's an incredible book because the Holocaust is happening, but he doesn't know it's the Holocaust. Nobody does. So he's talking about his heart murmur and his wife and his work at the university. And just at the edge of the entries, there'll be something about Hitler broadcasting from Berlin. Or at one point, they take his office away. And it was an incredible – for this, it was a real kind of a modeling thing to see the way that the whole culture was going nuts, but the central character didn't see it. Yeah.
That's our Eva.
Yeah, exactly. She's the only one. She's the only one who can see it.
She was the only one.
Yeah.
This theme of what did I call it in my notes? Suburban affluence and its issues comes up again in a story you call Home. What's that one about?
That's well, at one point I was reading. This will make me sound very distinguished. I was reading Heracles by Euripides, and I thought this would be a cool Iraq War, metaphor. And then I let it go for 2 or 3 years, and in the meantime, I sort of forgot the plot and mangled it in my mind. So then one day I just thought, well, let me see if I can sort of channel Euripides a little bit. And so this story is kind of a war veteran coming home, and the world he left behind is not there anymore.
We may come back to this highfalutin story when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
All right, 10th of December is the title of the book. It's a brilliant, marvelous, unforgettable collection of stories by one George Saunders, who I don't think is ever going to write a novel. He's having so much fun,
I object.
So much success writing short stories. And he gets these ideas and dreams, and then he sits down and writes them, and it's so easy that why would he do a novel?
I agree.
I mean, come on.
Living off the fat of the land.
Makes absolutely no sense at all. Who else said something nice about your book? Let me see. MacArthur and Guggenheim Fellow. I wanted to mention that.
Yes.
Makes you even more distinguished, I guess. When you're out for cocktails, hello, I'm a MacArthur Guggenheim Fellow.
Yeah, I have
Who
a
the hell
little
are you?
index card I just taped to my forehead.
On the forehead. Good idea. MacArthur and Guggenheim Fellow, former geophysical engineer, and one-of-a-kind satirist, George Saunders delivers a sterling, I love this phrase, a sterling batch of off-angle news stories. And that's from Elle magazine. I thank them for a sterling batch.
That's going to be the name of my band, a sterling batch.
Sterling batch, I like that. Yes, I like it very much. One of the stories called Puppy reminded me of a book that which we had on the program not too long ago. It's written by a fellow by the name of Solomon, and it is called Far from the Tree, and that is in distinction with Not Far from the Tree, about children and the families who have children that we call exceptional children, who will never be anything but struggling to continue existence. And one of the points made in the book over and over again is that what he found out in his research, what Mr. Solomon found out in his research, is that these parents don't want to give up these kids. These parents, have them, they love them, and they care for them. And I was reminded of that in this story, Puppy. What had she just said? That had been good. Love was liking someone how he was and doing things to help him get even better. And that's all they can do. And that better is like infinitesimal.
Right.
And she goes on, like Bo wasn't perfect, but she loved him how he was and tried to help him get better. If they could keep him safe, maybe he'd mellow out as he got older. If he mellowed out, maybe he could someday have a family like there he was now in the yard, sitting quietly, looking at flowers, tapping with his bat, happy enough. He looked up, waved the bat at her, and gave her that smile. And that is so close in spirit and content to what Solomon found over and over again in his research with those people.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea because in that story, she's doing something a little bit unreasonable to protect him, partly because she doesn't have the money to do otherwise. And I thought a little bit about how sometimes as parents, I think we confuse love and pride. In other words, the kid is doing really well. Oh, that's love. But actually, at a deeper level, there's that point where it doesn't really matter what they do. You love is knowing them so well.
Yes. That
everything they do is interesting and precious, and anything you can do to make their life incrementally nicer is an expression of love. So I think that's in her case, she has already been through the part where love is simply pride because this is a really difficult kid. And she's burned through that to the place where love is what it really should be, which is just attention and concern, and even the smallest improvement is a real one.
And it's that situation, I think, where the term unconditional love lives.
Exactly.
And it's right. It's the perfect thing to say.
Yeah, and it's such when you're in that state, it's so powerful because there's no questions. It's all
Now, there's a story in this book of yours so short that we have permission to let you read the whole thing.
Oh boy! All right.
It's a story called Sticks.
It is. Excuse me. Every year, Thanksgiving night, we flocked out behind Dad as he dragged the Santa suit to the road and draped it over a kind of crucifix he'd built out of metal pole in the yard. Super Bowl week, the pole was dressed in a jersey and Rod's helmet, and Rod had to clear it with Dad if he wanted to take the helmet off. On 4th of July, the pole was Uncle Sam. On Veterans Day, a soldier. On Halloween, a ghost. The pole was Dad's one concession to glee. We were allowed a single Crayola from the box at a time. One Christmas Eve, he shrieked at Kimmy for wasting an apple slice. He hovered over us as we poured ketchup, saying, "Good enough, good enough." Birthday parties consisted of cupcakes, no ice cream. The first time I brought a date over, she said, "What's with your dad and that pole?" And I sat there blinking. We left home, married, had children of our own, found the seeds of meanness blooming also within us. Dad began dressing the pole with more complexity and less discernible logic. He draped some kind of fur over it on Groundhog Day and lugged out a floodlight to ensure a shadow. When an earthquake struck Chile, he laid the pole on its side and spray-painted a rift in the earth. Mom died, and he dressed the pole as death and hung from the crossbar photos of Mom as a baby. We'd stop by and find odd talismans from his youth arranged around the base. Army medals, theater tickets, tubes of Mom's makeup. One autumn, he painted the pole bright yellow. He covered it with cotton swabs that winter for warmth and provided offspring by hammering in 6 cross sticks around the yard. He ran lengths of string between the pole and the sticks and taped to the string letters of apology, admissions of error, pleas for understanding, all in a frantic hand on index cards.
And if you want to hear the rest of that story, get yourself out to your bookstore, go to that other thing online, which we don't talk about here, and tell them you want a copy of 10th of December, Stories by George Saunders. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.